Good morning, everyone. My name is Senator Salazar. Just want to welcome everyone to the second meeting of this legislative session of the Standing Committee on Crime Victims, Crime and Corrections. Want to first acknowledge our committee's ranking member, Senator Akshar. Senator Akshar, would you like to say a few words?
No, thank you, Senator.
Sure. And just want to acknowledge the other members of this committee who are here with us. Senator Gustavo Rivera, Senator Bailey, Senator Myrie, Senator Ryan, and Senator Gallivan. Welcome, everyone. Today we have 4 bills on the agenda to consider. Our first bill is S-830B by Senator Comrie. The clerk will read.
An act to amend the election law, the criminal procedure law, the executive law, and the correction law in relation to voting by formerly incarcerated individuals convicted of a felony, and to repeal certain provisions of the election law relating thereto.
Are there any questions or discussion of the bill?
Move the bill.
Motion to move the bill?
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm a
Or-
nay.
Nay. Aye without rec. The bill is reported to rules. Second bill on our agenda is S-1415 by Senator Rivera. The clerk will read.
To amend the executive law in relation to findings of the State Board of Parole necessary for discretionary release of incarcerated persons on parole.
Are there questions or discussion about the bill?
Madam Chair. So this is my bill, commonly referred to as a fair and timely parole bill. Thank you, Madam Chair, for putting it on the agenda today. And at the core of it, this would change current state law, which I believe just perpetuates a system that ultimately what it does is continues to punish individuals who have already paid their due to society. The current law has a sentence in it that would be stricken from the law if this bill is signed, and in part it reads that his release. We're not going to deal with the fact that it's not inclusive of every gender, but regardless, that his release is not incompatible with the welfare of society and will not so deprecate the seriousness of his crime as to undermine respect for law. Unquote. The main issue that I have with this particular part of the law is that it has been used by the parole board for generations to continue to punish individuals who have already done everything that they can do to correct themselves, to accept responsibility for their crimes, and to rehabilitate. There are instances in which I believe that no one should be defined by the worst thing that they have ever done. And certainly, while this bill, one thing that should be made clear is that it leaves in the law all sorts of standards that the parole board could still use to say this person can and does present a danger to society if they are released. But the reality is that the majority of individuals who are currently incarcerated, even for very heinous crimes, if those individuals have accepted responsibility for their crime, if they have done all the work necessary to rehabilitate themselves, and they have a demonstrated ability to become better people, it just seems to me that by allowing the parole board to continue to be able to consistently punish them by saying, well, because of something that you did 20 years ago, regardless of how much you've accepted responsibility for it, you have owned it, you have apologized, and you have, more importantly, done the work to correct yourself as a human being, it doesn't matter because of what you did 20 years ago or 26 years ago, or more than that. It just seems to me that this is a common sense change that would still leave the authority to the parole board to grant parole or not, but would take away this part of the law and would instead include that unless the parole case record demonstrates there is a current and unreasonable risk, the person will violate the law if released, and such risk cannot be mitigated by parole supervision. Again, I think it is a common sense change that would allow the board to make a decision based on who the person is now not who they were whenever they originally committed the crime and were convicted for it. And for that reason, I would ask my colleagues to consider. I thank the chairwoman for putting it on the agenda, and I would really appreciate my colleagues be supportive of this measure today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Of course. Any additional questions or discussion?
Madam Chairwoman, if I may.
Of course.
Well, of course, I have a great deal of respect for the sponsor of this particular piece of legislation. I respectfully disagree with him. I think if it were his mother or his child who was violated by someone, he may think differently. Just one question, if I may, to Senator Rivera. Have we defined current and unreasonable risk? How will the parole board, the members of the parole board, weigh those two words, or the way you describe that risk, a current risk or an unreasonable risk?
Go ahead, Senator.
If I may, the part of what the parole board would consider is what that individual has done while incarcerated and what they have demonstrated while incarcerated during their time inside. Let's say, for example, if there's a case of someone who is eligible for parole because of the time that they've spent inside. And once they're looking at the record of the person while incarcerated, it is demonstrated that this person has been a constant issue, has had all sorts of shots on them, has done all sorts of things, has been violent towards other people while incarcerated. Obviously, they take that into consideration and they say, you've not really demonstrated that you are ready to be allowed back outside. But the reality is that in most instances, people who have records that are spotless or sometimes decades, regardless of what they've done in the last 10, 15, 20 years, it seems that the parole board says, like, well, regardless of what you've done to demonstrate that you have changed, that you are no longer whomever committed that crime so many years ago, that person should be considered for release based on who they are today. And for the record, while I certainly recognize, and you said if it was somebody in my family, somebody that I had known, I cannot deny that the strong emotional response from me would be to make sure that that person is held accountable. But I think that we have to have a broader conversation about what accountability ultimately is and whether that person should be punished forever. Now, in that, I know that we might have a distinction and we might have a difference of opinion. And for whomever, whether it's you, sir, or anybody else in public who believes that there are certain things which are unforgivable. And if you do them, regardless of what you do afterwards, that you will forever be judged by that act, then certainly this bill makes no sense and should not be put forward. But I believe in redemption. And I believe that even the worst of folks, or even the people who have done the worst of things, even if it was against a member of my own family, believe to be judged on what they have done to correct that mistake. And if they have done the work, I believe they should be given the opportunity to return to their community.
If I may,
I'm sorry. I just, if I may, Madam Chairwoman, I appreciate that, Senator Rivera. And again, as I said at the outset, I certainly have a great deal of respect for you. I just think when it comes to this issue, as you said in the latter part of your last statement, we happen to disagree on this particular point, and that's okay. When it comes time, Madam Chairwoman, I'll be voting in the negative.
Thank you. And I just wanted to briefly add, in the interest of crime victims, wanted to note that many crime victim and survivor advocates groups support this bill, including the New York State Coalition Against Sexual Assault and the Downstate Coalition for Crime Victims, in the interest of crime victims. Is there any additional comments? And Orion?
So I'm going to be without Ruck on this bill. Well, I certainly believe in redemption. I also believe that how we sentence people in New York State needs to fundamentally change. And I'm not quite sure that making this one part of parole law change to make it a presumption. I hope in the coming year we can look more fundamentally at how we sentence, parole. I don't even know if my mind's not made up if parole today is an outdated concept that just doesn't work and just adds to the sort of whole incarceration complex. So I'm not convinced that this bill is going to do it, but I would like to work with all of you to look at how we do sentencing, and then, how we then use this parole board, which I'm starting to view as just archaic. How do we make this work? So while I'm, not questioning anyone's intentions, but I don't think this, we need to do a lot more in this area.
Thank you. Senator Bailey?
If I may, I would agree with my colleague in that, yes, sentencing reform has to be something that we take up, but I do believe that this is something that will move the ball forward in our justice system. Look, there is no magic bullet theory in any piece of legislation that we do in any whatsoever. But I think that when we look at the legislative agenda that we have and what we're tasked with doing, especially in this committee, I think that this is going to be a step forward in being able to move the ball forward. So I commend you, Senator Rivera, for putting this piece of legislation forward. And Madam Chair, thank you for putting on the agenda. All of you I respect as colleagues, and we've had many conversations about what we can do. I think that there are plenty of steps to be taken in the future, but I think that it starts with the movement of this bill. And I would be voting in the affirmative, and I would like to move it if possible, Madam Chair.
Sure. So a motion from Senator Bailey to move the bill. Is there a second?
Can I second my own? Well, I second the motion.
Yes,
not
yes.
necessarily. I would
Yes.
second the motion from Senator Bailey.
A second from Senator Rivera. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Senator Akshar? AWR? The bill is moved. The third bill on our committee agenda.
Yeah, we got you, Senator
That's
Ryan.
good.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
thank you.
Yes, thank you. The third bill on the agenda is S 2211 by Senator Sepulveda. The clerk will read.
An act to amend the correction law in relation to the prohibition of double bunked housing in correctional facilities.
Are there any questions or discussion?
Move the bill.
Motion to move
I
the bill. A second by Senator Rivera. All those in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Opposed? AWR? The bill is reported. And the fourth and final bill is S 4160 by Senator Comrie. The clerk will read.
An act to amend the correction to allowing certain additional privileges to inmates when visitation is suspended for any reason.
Are there any questions or discussion?
Move the bill.
Motion to move the bill. Any
Second.
Second.
by Senator Akshar and Senator Bailey. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
AWR, the bill is to be reported to Finance. And that concludes our agenda for today's Crime Victims, Crime and Corrections meeting.